Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. So for those I haven't met, I'm Courtney Jones. I'm one of the coaches here at Bliss. And today we'll be covering some investor terms you need to know when you're working with investors. And just for the information, I'm going to be really kind of just covering the terms and some of the acronyms investors use and what they mean. I'm not going to be teaching the actual business model. We'll do that in a future training. So we have a couple of other trainings coming up for geared towards investors. One of them is on financing, finding private money and hard money. And then one of them is on buying no money down. So those will be future trainings. This one's really just sort of about some of the acronyms and words you might hear if you're working with investors and what you need to know about them. Okay. And I will take questions at the end. I have a place for it. So feel free to chill out for a minute and hang out and ask your questions at the end. And let me see, there we go. So a couple of things to first know, just so you know, first of all, I've been investing and been in the real estate business I'm going on my 31st year. So I started while I was in college and started investing, really was an investor first and then became a realtor partway after about like 5 or 6 years as an investor. I've done every kind of investing that there is. I've invested in tax liens, tax deeds. I've done rehabs. I have a buy and hold portfolio, all of which have purchased no money down. So I've never gotten a bank loan for an investment property. So I actually live and breathe this stuff. I just finished a rehab in Arcadia. And I also I've trained around the country and been on some stages with some of the gurus who have been teaching this stuff for years. It's just not really my thing to be a trainer in front of big audiences. I don't really like it, but I've been doing this. So I kind of live and breathe this primarily. And then my realtor stuff is really secondary. So a couple of things to know, there are different types of investors, right? So there's your part-time investors who are just kind of doing things low-key. They buy 1 or 2 real estate investment properties a year. They do traditional financing with those. They work with a realtor to find those properties. And they're not really what I'm going to be addressing today, although you will hear some things that they possibly could use in their language and things that they're saying to you. But most of this is geared more towards the full-time investor. But you will see a little bit of crossover. So investors typically, if they're a full-time investor or wanting to get to that, their goals and things that you need to know about is that their goal is to put as little cash into the deal as possible. And for some people, that's a well, duh moment, you know. Obviously that's a goal for almost everyone. But when you're a traditional investor and you're working with a realtor and getting bank financing, it's less important than when you're a full-time investor. When you're a full-time investor and you're trying to buy 6, 7, 8 deals a month, then you just don't have the cash. No matter how good you are at raising money or how good you are at finding that, eventually that dries up. So it's very difficult to be a full-time investor and do that type of a deal flow with cash because you just don't have that much cash. It's after 2 or 3 deals, for most people, that cash is going to go away, especially with prices currently, you know, as high as they are. They obviously want to optimize returns, and then they want to maximize tax benefits. A really great question to ask investors when you get calls from people is, will you be using leverage, paying cash, or seeking creative financing? All the gurus that I know that teach around the country, that teach all the no money down techniques, all kind of talk to people about as soon as they get out of their class, what they're supposed to be doing is partnering with a realtor who will be willing to run comps for them, pull expireds for them, and pull any information that they want. And the big pitch that all of them teach is that realtors do all of this for free. And so we all know that's not true, right? Our time is money too as a realtor. So you have to be really careful when you're getting these types of things. It's like you have to decipher, is this somebody that's a wannabe investor and is actually going to do it and take action? Because you know, the old Pareto principle of 80-20 rule, 80% of them will not actually ever do anything. So one of those questions is finding out if they're going to use leverage, pay cash, or seek creative financing. Kind of gives you a clue a little bit to start with as to where they are in that. So if they're seeking creative financing, Just FYI, that usually means they have no money of their own to put into the deal and they're looking for no money down deals, okay? Not a deal breaker for me because obviously I said that's how I've bought most of my portfolio and most of my deals, but it is something you need to know going in. So you wanna just be cautious of that so you don't spend a ton of time with that person. Now, a couple of basics you need to know. These are terms investors throw around constantly. And it's important that you understand what they are. You know, in our realtor world, we say things like CMA, and the public looks at us like, huh? You know, we just think everybody knows that. And investors are kind of the same way. So ARV is a really common one, which means after repair value. To investors, what they're taught is, what would the ARV is, what would the house sell for after it's fixed up? Okay, so if the house is in not great condition, once I go in and rehab it or do any kind of work to it or whatever, what is that house going to sell for? So you and I would know that as the sold price or a comp price or whatever. Investors tend to call that an ARV. Then they talk in terms of LTV. Now, LTV, we all kind of know as a going through real estate school what LTV means in reality. The way investors look at it is it's the loan to value, which is a percentage of the ARV. So as an investor, what we typically hear is you want to buy properties at a 70% or less LTV minus repairs. So just for smart numbers, so I can do them in my head, if a property is going to sell for $100,000 and it needs $30,000 worth of work, then the most I'm going to would offer would be 70% of that. So 70,000 minus the $30,000 worth of work. So I'd be making my offer on that property at $40,000. So when you hear investors say LTV, that's what they're referring to. Now, I know some of you are like, yeah, good luck finding those, but they're out there. So common business models that investors work and talk about, and these are common things that are taught from coast to coast at real estate seminars. You're going to hear BRRRR. I'll get into each of these in more detail. House hacking, wholesaling, reverse wholesaling, wholetailing, and buy and hold. Now, of course, I didn't include rehabbing in here because I think HGTV has made that pretty much, you know, something everyone knows what that means. So I didn't include that. But each of these is common methods that are taught. And that doesn't include things like short-term rentals, which I'll get to towards the end as well. So there's some terminology and language in there that you need to be aware of as well. So let's talk about BRRRR as a strategy. So first of all, what does BRRRR stand for? Well, it's buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Okay, so buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. What that typically looks like is a 6-month process. If it's a larger property, possibly a little bit longer, a year to a year and a half. So those investors are looking for a property that they can add value to, whether that be a house, a fourplex, or a small apartment building, and sometimes even larger apartment buildings. So they're looking to be able to buy that. Oftentimes they use their HELOC as a down payment to purchase that property originally, or some private funds, which we'll talk about in another training, to buy that initial property. And then they go in there, they fix it up, increase the rents, and then give a period of time for the new rents to kick in and create a flow and like a long-term history, 6 months or so. And then they can go in and refinance that and pull their own cash out. So they go in with maybe a partner, with a money partner, buy that property, get it fixed up, increase the rents, do whatever turnover is necessary, and then refinance that and pull their cash out. This is a really common strategy. It's super popular. It is definitely going to start to see some changing in the industry right now because of interest rates going up. It's not going to be as popular, but historically interest rates are still very, very low compared to what they have been. So that's the BRRRR strategy. Now, house hacking is basically where you buy a unit, a house, a fourplex, a triplex, or whatever. You live in a part of it, and then you rent out to the other rooms or parts. So for instance, I have a friend in Chicago. She and her husband have a 4-bedroom house. They live in the master bedroom, and then they have the main house and everything. And then they rent each of the other 3 bedrooms. So each of those bedrooms rents for, I think it's like $800 a month. They get a shared bathroom, and then they have access to the house during normal, living hours. So each of those 3 bedrooms rented out at $800 a month gives them $2,400 a month in cash flow. And her house payment, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was around $1,800. So they're actually making a profit from renting out those bedrooms. They're a young couple, and it's a great way for them to be able to still travel and see the world and not have a house payment, but have their house payment covered by others. So this is a really good, house hacking is a really good business model with FHA because there's a low down payment required for that. And it's a great way for people to start in investing because they get a feel for what is it like to manage people? You know, it's a little different. You're managing roommates, if you will, than tenants, but it is a good entry level into it. I know a lot of people who've done house hacking and kind of moved up to other units, bigger units. You can also do house hacking in like a triplex or a fourplex. You know, you buy one of the unit or you buy the whole unit, you live in one of the units, you rent the other 2 or 3 out. And oftentimes the rental of those will cover your mortgage as well. So that's what you'll hear as house hacking. Now, wholesaling, I put all of this in one because it's basically all just a variety of the same thing. So wholesaling in all its forms is basically buying low at 60 to 80% of the value, the ARV, minus repairs, and then selling either to a rehabber or to a landlord. Those are traditionally who we sell them to. Wholesaling typically involves doing a lot of marketing. So a wholesaler does a lot of marketing direct to sellers, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And that wholesaler then finds deals, negotiates deals. So a wholesaler needs to be really good at marketing and they need to be really good at negotiating. Those are the 2 biggest things they are going to be doing. Reverse wholesaling is just simply finding the buyers first. So it really came about a few years ago. One of the gurus wanted to teach something a little different. So they flipped it around a little and started teaching to find the buyers first. And then all of a sudden it became a nationwide thing. So reverse wholesaling is finding the buyers first. So what you would do is if I was interested in wholesaling and making money doing that, I would go out and build a list of cash buyers, people who are interested in rehabbing or people who are looking for rental properties, find out what they're looking for, and then I would go target specific markets. So it's really not a whole lot different. It was basically a sales pitch from a guru who was teaching wholesaling. Wholetailing is essentially the same thing, except for instead of me as a wholesaler buying the property and then sending it out to rehabbers and to landlords, I'm putting it on the MLS or I'm marketing it direct to the public. So this is designed for people like blue collar people who want to get into a house cheaper and are willing to do some of the work. So if I can get into a $400,000 house for $325,000 and then do some of the work over time, I'm going to be a happy camper. Okay. Not everybody obviously is in that boat, but basically a wholetailer will be a wholesaler. They'll buy the properties cheap. And then instead of selling it just to a cash buyers list or rehabber list, they're going to market it to the general public. Oftentimes putting it on the MLS, especially this is a really good model during super hot markets like we had experienced for the last few years, because there's just so little inventory and people are willing to take what they can. So this is a really good model for that. So that's wholetailing. Now, whenever you're dealing with wholesaling, one thing you need to know about is memorandums. And so one of the things that's taught from coast to coast in the wholesaling world is to file a memorandum when you get a property under contract. As a realtor, you just need to know what this is and the things to look for. So as an example, what happens is, let's say I'm a wholesaler and I market to a group of divorcing people, okay? And I go out and I get a property under contract because they're going through a divorce, and I get it under contract for say 3.25, and it's really worth 4.25, okay? I get that under contract for $325,000. Well, now what I want to do is try to find either rehabbers or landlords that would be willing to purchase that property, that contract from me at $335,000. Okay, therefore myself making $10,000. So I'm buying it at $325,000. I'm going to sell the contract, my right to purchase it for $325,000. I'm going to sell that for $10,000. Okay. Before I market that to everybody on my list, what people are taught is to file a memorandum in the courthouse. And what the memorandum does is it basically just puts the world on notice that I have an interest in that property. Because really when I get a contract on it, now I have equitable interest in that property. And so I'm making that publicly aware by filing this memorandum. The memorandum just basically says, hey, Cortney Jones and her company have an interest in purchasing this property. So title company, if anybody else tries to transfer this title, you need to check with her first, okay? People do that because historically, other people that I might send that out to possibly would go around me and try to go direct to the seller and get that property under contract. It's not uncommon for another wholesaler to come in and say, well, what did she offer you? And then the seller says, well, she offered me $325. Oh, well, I'll give you $330. And so then obviously the seller says, okay, fine, I'll do that. So then they cancel their contract with me and sign a new contract with that person. So the memorandum kind of keeps people from going around the original contract. It does cloud the title, and it is something you need to be aware of, because when that's on your deals and you're selling these, if you see that, you kind of just need to know that this may cause a delay in closings and may cause you to have to do some extra work. I just had one on a property recently. It took almost 3 months to get the memorandum cleared. So you kind of need to know that and just know what it is all about, okay? Oh, I just covered that. I forgot I had a slide to show you. That is a graphic of all the things I just told you. So how wholesalers get paid is, it depends. Honestly, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. So as you hopefully heard me say, when you're a wholesaler, you are selling a contract and not a property. We'll get into this more in my actual class on wholesaling, but if you're selling a contract, you can assign that contract. Okay, so that's usually a one-page document, depending on the state you're in, that basically just says, I, Cortney Jones, have this property under contract for $325,000. And for the sum of $10,000, I am selling this contract to Mara. Okay, and so it's a simple document. Most title companies are used to using them. Most title companies are used to working with them, and they know how to close those transactions. Sometimes people don't want to use assignments because they don't want their end buyer to know how much they're making. I personally don't care. If the numbers worked for you and you agreed to purchase it at that, you shouldn't care how much I'm making, and you have no idea how much money I spent marketing to get that deal in the first place. I might be breaking even. So if somebody does care, then they'll oftentimes do something called a double close. And a double close is basically where I have to close on the transaction with my seller, and then I have to turn around and you have to close on the transaction with me. So it's what's called an A to B and B to C transaction, okay? So the seller, or the original seller, is the A, so they sell it to me, B, and then I sell it to the end buyer, rehabber, landlord, whoever it may be, so B to C. This is typically done immediately, like within minutes of one another, sometimes an hour. It can go days. It's pretty rare that it does. It's usually an extenuating circumstance, but the title company does all that work, manages the A to B and the B to C transaction. And oftentimes title companies will allow what's called a flow through, which means I don't have to bring the money for that. So an A to B would be, you know, me closing on it, but I don't necessarily have to give you the $325,000. They're just holding that in kind of in an escrow until now I turn around and sell it to my next person. So the money just passes through. So the end buyer C is funding the transaction. Some mortgage companies will not allow that to happen. So it sort of just depends on a lot of different components, but that's how it works. And that's what the language is, okay, as a whole. If I have to fund it, which is sometimes required, then people use something called transaction funding. And as I said, I'll go through an entire class in August on funding real estate investments. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but transaction funding, if you hear somebody saying, no, I'm just going to use transactional funding, that's what this is. It's short-term funding. Usually it's an hour to possibly 3. I know of one guy who will do a 5-day close for double closes. And it's when the title company or the mortgage lender, whoever you might be selling it to, requires me to purchase that deal. They're like, no, we don't want any pass-through funds happening. We want that funded fully. So that if that were the case, if I don't happen to have $325,000 sitting around, I would use transactional funding to get that A to B and then transaction closed so that C can purchase it finally from me. So that's another one you'll hear regularly. Now, I talked earlier about a bunch of different things, but particularly with the wholesaling. Another common thing in working with investors, if they're looking for creative financing type stuff, then what they're primarily going to be focusing on, if they know what they're doing, is working with motivated sellers. And so motivated sellers are really people who need to sell versus want to sell. So as realtors, we're pretty commonly working with people who want to sell. I want a bigger house. I just had a baby. It's a little crowded in here. I need to move to a bigger place. I like it in Chandler and I don't want to be in Gilbert anymore or whatever. Okay, they're not necessarily needs. Motivated sellers, which is what a lot of creative real estate investors look for, are people who absolutely need to sell. It's not an optional type of thing. And these are often people going through a divorce. They got a job transfer, they lost a job, they can't make their payment anymore, all variations of that. Code violation list is a huge aspect of working with motivated sellers. They can't, for whatever reason, they can't keep up their property. It could be money, they don't have the money to do it. It could be that they're older and they can't get out and mow the lawn anymore, or they can't repair the eaves or whatever is necessary. So they keep getting a code violation because the city comes in or county and does whatever work needs to be done. And so then they get a fine. So the code violation list is a huge list where we find a lot of motivated sellers. Delinquent taxes is another one. People forget to pay their taxes or they just don't want to. And so that's another motivated seller list. It's fine usually to catch up after 1 year or 6 months, but after 2 or 3 years of not doing that, sometimes it's difficult for people to come up with that kind of money. Here in Arizona, tax delinquencies are not let go like in some states. They're pretty on top of things here. In other states, you can go 5, 6, 7 years without paying your taxes, and it's not as tracked down. Inherited houses, probate deals. This is really common. A lot. I always think to myself, or used to, well, I wish I inherited a house. Like, well, how is that a problem? But for some people, if you have 2, 3 kids and you're barely getting by, you've got a job and you're doing everything you can, your 24 hours a day is filled up. All of a sudden now you have this new house to take care of, and more than likely it needs some work. It needs cleaning out. It needs all of these things. And then you've got to so it's going to take money to get it fixed up. All of that then can become a problem, quote unquote, and cause people to be motivated to get rid of it at a discount. Burned out landlords is common. That is somebody who thinks it's going to be easy to make money as a landlord, and then they realize, oh, it actually takes work. Sort of how people feel about realtors, oh, it's easy to be a realtor, and then they come in and find out it takes work. It's sort of the same thing. Pre-foreclosures. This can be people that are on a list of where the notice has been filed with the county, and it can also be people who are just simply late on their mortgages. Like, we buy a list of people who are 30, 60, and 90 days late on their mortgage, so we can start marketing to them in advance. So that'd be like a pre-foreclosure. And then unkept houses and hoarder houses. So these are all just some of the lists of motivated sellers that your investor clients might be working with. And I think as a realtor, one of the ways that you can use that information is to help them because you have access through some of the sources that you have through title companies to be able to get them some of these lists. And if you're helping them get those lists and get access to that, and then they're following through with it and taking action, then that's obviously going to be a transaction for you that you can profit from. So creative financing versus traditional financing. So creative financing is really more about using, as I said at the beginning, less of our own money. And I'll say ours as in our investors. Okay, so I like to work with people who are in a situation to be able to provide owner financing. So instead of me having to go to Wells Fargo and wait 6 weeks to get approved, even though I have an 800 credit score, but because I have a property portfolio of over 50 properties, all of a sudden now I have to go through a colonoscopy to get a bank financing every single time, okay? Well, if I'm trying to do this full time, then that's really just something I can't do. So if I'm going through an owner and working with an owner to provide the financing and they can get monthly payments, then sometimes that can help them. So that's where you'll find a lot of your creative financing people coming in. So the owner of the property can become the lender on that property, particularly if they own the home free and clear, which is, 34% of homes in the United States are owned free and clear, which is a fascinating statistic. Most people are, and it's actually creeping up. So it used to be 33% like 5 years ago. So I like to work with people that do owner financing because I can buy more properties and I don't have to go through the rigorous processes like I do with the bank or mortgage company. Owner carryback is really just a form of owner financing. So owner financing and owner carryback are essentially the same thing. What happens is the owner of the property is deciding that they're going to become the bank. So instead of me getting financing, I'm saying to the owner, Mr. Seller, would you be willing to accept payments for the property? You know, I see that you're asking $200,000 for this house. Would you be willing to accept monthly payments of X for this house? And that would provide an income stream for you. And it would allow me to get this house closed in the next 48 hours due to your circumstances and situation, where if I were to go to a bank, it's going to take 6 weeks. So owner financing can be the whole purchase price. It could also be a carryback on a small amount. So let's say the seller says, well, I really need some of the money up front, but I'm willing to take some of it. You know, I can finance part of it. So maybe for my down payment, I might get an owner carryback. So the owner says, instead of you having to go to the bank and get a down payment, give a down payment of $20,000, I'll hold the mortgage for that. So I'll hold a $20,000 note for that. So that's what an owner carryback would be. So it's still a form of owner financing. It's just handled a little bit differently, and it's usually a partial type thing. Sub 2. So subject to is the same as sub 2. This is where basically an investor takes over the existing financing that is on the property, and they begin making the payments to the bank or to the lender. I will get into this big time in my no money down purchase. Most of my properties have been purchased this way. If you read a note, that you will see on the note from the lenders that it says, if you transfer this deed, this note may be called due in full. Okay, the operative word there being maybe, doesn't mean it is. I've done over 200 of these transactions. I personally, knock on wood, have never had a note called in full. I do know people who have, but very few, like very few. So what this happened, let's say as an example, a person is getting a divorce and they just bought their house like a year ago and they have no equity. So not necessarily going to be something that's happened in the last couple of years, but in this market at least, but they have no equity and they go to sell the house and it's, you know, the realtor says to them, oh, well, you owe 300,000 on it. And your net sheet says you're going to get 280 when it's all said and done. So you need to be prepared to come to closing with $20,000. And they're like, yeah, we don't have $20,000. Okay. That's a scenario where subject to would be the option for purchasing that property. So what would happen is they would deed the house over to me, and then I would begin making the payments on that note. Okay. And there's 1,000 things that happen in between that for simplicity, but just so you understand what the terminology of sub 2 means. And for those that are going, that's illegal, you can't do that, look at any closing statement and you'll see it as a pre-printed item on the line item of a closing statement. It's always been there. It's done in commercial all the time and has been for a long time. And it's been done in residential. I've been doing it for 20 of the 30 years I've been involved. So it's definitely legal. Obviously you do have to read the note that you're taking over, because there are some loans where it does say, like for instance, reverse mortgages, they will instantly call it due. So we don't do sub 2s on reverse mortgages. So there are a couple of notes that you will look at that you'll say, no, I don't want to do this one. But for the most part, most of the notes you can do that with. And banks know it happens. You know, if they want to call it due, they can call it due. Then you just have to refinance or do whatever you do. Okay. A wraparound mortgage is very similar, but this would be when somebody had equity. So let's say that same scenario, husband and wife are getting a divorce. They can't be in the same room together. They're super motivated to get rid of this house, but they do have equity. Maybe they have $50,000 worth of equity. In a case like that, what I would do is I would offer to take over their mortgage just so that I can get in quickly and be able to help them fast without having to go get my own financing and have those expenses. But then they would take a mortgage for the remaining amount. Maybe not the full 50. I might say to them, I'll tell you what, I'll give you each $10,000 cash so you can walk away. So that'll be 20,000 if you'll carry a note for the remaining 30,000. Okay. So that would be then one mortgage that we would write for the full amount of the sub 2 and the wrap. And then I would make payments to them on that. They would pay their underlying note and then they would keep whatever was left over. So wraparound mortgage is very similar to that. It's just you're going to have an additional note on top of the existing mortgage. Okay. A novation agreement. So this is really where I think this is one that realtors need to know really well. I think this is a really good opportunity for a lot of realtors that they miss out on. If you don't want to be a full-time investor, but you want to make some money and you run across these scenarios a lot, I think that novation agreements can be a hugely valuable asset. A novation agreement is basically where you go to a house, it needs a lot of work. Maybe the people don't have the money that it is going to take to get that property in order. Then you can agree to do the work and bring your team in or people in, or you or whoever's doing your work, your work for you, get the house in order to be able to sell, and then you would split the profits. And when I say split, it doesn't have to be a 50-50. Everything's negotiable. So it just depends on the equity. If the person has, $100,000 worth of equity and you're going to be putting $25,000 into it, then I don't think it's fair that you split the full huge amount. That's just taking advantage of people. But there's different ways and scenarios in which you can negotiate it. But a novation agreement is used basically to say, I'm claiming a little bit of a stake to this house because I'm going to be putting time and money into getting it fixed up. And then when we get it sold to another party, we've agreed on these terms and it's all documented and laid out. And then this is how we're going to split things. So it's a way for you to be able, if you go out to a listing appointment and you're like, whoa, this house is never going to sell because it needs a ton of work. It's a way for you to get involved with that, but not necessarily have to purchase the house. So you're kind of getting involved with dipping your toe in the water, if you will. I think it's I think it's underutilized for realtors a lot. All right. Then of course there's the buy and hold. So buy and hold, I'm going to move this over here so I can see, in all of its various forms is, people own and then they rent for cash flow or appreciation. There's short-term rentals is really popular right now. People are buying and holding and just using it as short-term rentals, whether they put it on Airbnb, VRBO, whatever, the traveling nurses sites, all of that. Medium-term rentals, traveling nurses and corporate, and then there's long-term rentals, which is typically defined as 6+ months. So within the investor world, obviously all of that's a little subjective. One person might teach it and say long-term rentals is a year and above, and then everything else is under. It a little bit depends on who you get your training from, but essentially short-term rentals would be nightly rentals. Medium would be longer terms, monthly, usually short-term, and then long-term, 6 months to a year is pretty typical. So one term you need to know that's really, really popular right now amongst the real estate investing teachers across the country is rental arbitrage. Primarily, this is taught for short-term rental people. So as an investor, I want to get involved in the short-term rental business. If I go and I seek out people who are teaching the short-term rental business, this is a common way that they're teaching them to get into it with no money, essentially, and little to no money, and with just some legwork, okay? So what rental arbitrage basically is I would go to somebody who's renting a house or an apartment, okay? And I would negotiate a longer term lease with that person. And then I have the right to, it's not exactly a sublease, but for terminology purposes, I'll just say I have the right to sublease that and use that for my nightly business, okay? So I'm going in, I might go to a person, sign a 2-year lease with that person. 1 year works, 2 years, sometimes we get 3 years. And then I'm going to turn around and manage that as a short-term rental and rent it out on a nightly basis. Because the revenue is so much better from nightly rentals, I'm usually able to make that payment to those people for whatever, say $2,000, but I'm actually bringing in $5,000 to $6,000 because I'm renting it on a nightly basis. But instead of me having to go physically purchase a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 property, I'm just renting it from this person, okay? And then they don't want to manage the nightly rentals. So I'm doing that and I'm making the profits on that. This can be done in a variety of forms. Sometimes it's a matter of we split deals with people. They don't want to manage the nightly, but I do. And I don't, by the way, but as an example, so we might split that and I'll manage that part. It just kind of depends, but the rental arbitrage idea is essentially just renting it long-term and then renting it out to somebody else short-term. Excuse me. If I'm renting it from them, it's my responsibility typically to furnish that. And then I accept all the responsibilities for that. I put it on a short-term rental period or even a medium term. So that's what rental arbitrage is. Options. These are not taught a lot in the investing world anymore. There's a couple people who teach them. They're not used as often as they used to be. Part of that is because interest rates were so low the last few years. I do suspect we'll start to see these come back a little bit. In the 30 years I've been doing this, I've kind of seen, you know, a lot of things come and go. They've all been the same. All the stuff is stuff I learned in the beginning, but in certain markets, certain things are more popular and they kind of come and go. But options are basically used for buying or for selling. And when you have an option, you have the right to purchase something, but not the obligation, okay? So if I have an option with a seller to buy their property, if I have the option, I have the right to buy it at a set price, but I don't have to buy it, okay? So as a new investor, people use this a lot of times when they're fearful, or if they're like, if they've heard of subject to, but they're afraid to try that because they don't think people will do it. They don't think people will give them the deed. They'll use this as kind of a soft sell and get an option to purchase something. And so what will typically happen is they'll go out, they'll get an option to purchase it, let's say for $400,000, and then they'll go out and market that property for $450,000, $475,000, or a rental or whatever. And then once they get an end buyer, they'll feel more comfortable pursuing the purchase process from the initial. So it's used kind of that way. There's lease options when you're selling. I sell a lot of properties on lease options where people put down a down payment and they have the option to purchase it. We set a price for them today, and they have 10 years to get their credit in order and to purchase the property. So they might put down, say, a $5,000 deposit. I give them a lease to purchase the property, and then they also have an option to purchase it for the price that we agree upon and when they come in, and they have a 10-year period to be able to do that. And then they have to get their credit in order, they have to work on improving that, all that kind of stuff. If they choose not to purchase it, they'd lose that option money that they put down as a option consideration, but then because they didn't do the things they needed to do to purchase it. So you can use options for purchasing and you can use options for selling. So it's a creative technique on both ends. Rent to own is essentially the same as a lease option. And then a master lease option is sort of, if you think about the retail arbitrage I just told you about a minute ago, it's a similar type of thing to that. As a master lease option holder, I might go out and say to, let's say Edgar has 10 properties as an example in his portfolio, and he wants to get rid of them because he's a tired landlord. I might go to him and say, look, I don't have the money to purchase all 10 properties, but if you'll give me a master lease option on all of them, I'll take over the payments. I'll start making the payments for you, and then I'll just start managing them. You don't have to do anything, and I'll pay you X amount per month. And now I have all of the rights to all of those properties to lease all of those out, collect all the payments and rent them out, do everything, and then I have to send him his amount. So I might be collecting $20,000 a month, might be sending him $13,000, and then I'm keeping what's in the middle. So it's a way for me as an investor to have control of properties without actually having to go and purchase them, essentially is what a master lease option does. Some numbers you need to know that you'll hear your investor clients talk about. Net operating income. Net operating income is essentially revenue after expenses are paid. This does not include PITI, so principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay, but a lot of times investors will call you, they'll say, I'm looking for something that's going to net me about $13,000 a month. Okay, that's what they're looking for, is the net operating income of whatever they're stating. Okay, so that's the NOI. Cash flow is what is left over after NOI expenses and PITI. So let's say my cash flow is $1,000 a month. That means that I had my net, I made my mortgage payment, my taxes, my insurance, everything left, whatever's left over, that $1,000 is mine. This is money that I can spend. Now, a smart investor will put 15% of that away, but that's a whole nother class. So the cash flow is what they can spend at the end. DSCR, which is how people typically refer to it, DSCR, is debt service coverage ratio. Now this gets a little weird, and this only used to be used back in just a couple of years ago, really, with commercial properties, 5 and above. All of a sudden in the last couple of years, everybody started using it for single family homes as well. But it's because loans started coming out with mortgage brokers that are DSCR loans, where if your DSCR was a certain ratio, they would let you do that on a non-owner occupied house. So that's all the reason that it came about. But basically what this is it's the ratio of the operating income that's available to service the interest. And banks look for so like as an example, a one debt service coverage ratio means that you have enough money coming in to make the loan payment, and that's it. Okay, so they don't want that, obviously. Typically, banks are going to look for in investment properties a minimum requirement of a 1.3. It fluctuates ever so slightly depending, but typically I've seen them as low as 1.2, but I'd say 1.3 is more average. And lately, we've been seeing a lot of requirements of 1.5, which means that you have to have 1.5 times. So if your mortgage payment's $5,000, you have to have $7,500 coming in, so they know that you have the ability to make that loan payment. Okay, that's what the DSCR is. So a lot of debt service coverage ratio loans are used in the BRRRR method we talked about at the very beginning, and the banks are just using it to make sure that you're going to have enough money coming in to make their payment. Obviously, that's their concern. Cap rate, same thing. This one used to be used only in multifamilies. All of a sudden, people started throwing it around for single families. It really doesn't work that much for single families. I don't know why people use it. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot, but essentially the cap rate is the annual net operating income divided by the value of the property. Where it is good is what people who understand finances typically use it for is comparing apples to apples. So if I'm looking at 3 different single family homes as a rental opportunity, and one of them has a 7 cap, is how people refer to it, 7% cap. One of them has a 5 cap and one of them has a 6 cap. Well, then I'm probably going to pursue the 7 cap more. Okay, all things being equal, because that's going to make me more money in the long run. But you have to look at a lot of other things that don't get considered in the cap rate, which is how much work is it going to need to get it? Is it a 7 cap now with no potential to grow? But the 5 cap is a 5 cap now with a potential to grow a lot because the rents are really low. And as soon as you put a little bit of work into it and get the crappy tenants in there, then maybe out of there, then maybe you can make that a 7 cap. So it's good for comparison purposes, but at least know the terminology and understand when people call you, you're not like, what, a cap, what? At least you understand what it means. ROI is return on investment. My favorite thing, your net income divided by the cost of the investment times 100. So essentially your cap rate tells you what return you're going to get from the income property or what it currently is or should be. Well, ROI tells you what the return on your investment is going to be over a certain period of time. So if I give you $1 and you give me back $1.10, I'm getting a 10% return. Okay, so that's what ROI is for. And then cash on cash is divide the received net cash flow for the year by the amount of cash invested. A lot of investors are using this now as a calculation. It really is the smartest one. If I don't give you any money, but somehow I ask you to give me 10 cents back, okay, so I buy a property, no money down, and I'm getting $1,000 a month cash flow, my cash on cash return is infinite, right? I put 0 money into it and I'm making $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year. So my cash on cash return is huge, right? But if I have to put $10,000 into the property and it's inaccessible to me and I'm making that same $1,000 a month, I have a different cash on cash return. So that's what people are looking at, is the return on investment and cash on cash are the 2 most common ones. But a lot of times people hear these terms and they think they try to look intelligent, like they know what they're talking about, and they throw around a lot of numbers that don't matter. But you just want to know them to be able to communicate with them about them. Okay, upcoming investor training we're going to be doing on August 16th. I'm going to talk about financing investor deals. I'll talk about hard money, private money, and then other financing options. And then September 1st, we'll talk about buying real estate with no money down. And of course, we'll send out the links for that in advance. And that first one will be a shorter class. just to kind of get you prepared for this one. And then that one will be a little bit longer, just FYI. All right. Any questions? Please don't ask me math stuff. If you have a question, you have to unmute yourself, just FYI. Okay. No questions?
It's a lot of information, trying to digest it real quick.
Trying to digest it all. I will put the slides up with the video recording. We'll put it up on, what is it called? Sweet Assist, when it's all done here shortly. So you'll have the slides and the recording, because it is a lot. And I just kind of wanted you to understand the terminology and not teach you the business models at this stage. But at least if you get a call from an investor and they start throwing around, well, I buy all my properties sub 2 and then I lease option them, you're not going, what foreign language are you speaking? I don't know what you're talking of. So I just kind of wanted to introduce you to all of the things you might hear in the investor world and working with investors, and then be able to understand it a little bit. And I'm available if you guys ever have any questions, or you get an investor who's, trying to take advantage of you or using you a lot to do stuff. And you're like, yeah, can you check this person out and see if they're actually legit or whatever? I can ask them a few questions pretty quick and tell if they know what they're doing or not, and if they're just going to be wasting your time, or if they actually are going to do something. So I'm happy to help with anybody that's trying to work with investors and has that kind of thing pop up, because I definitely know what that's like. All right, no questions? All right, well, thank you guys. Appreciate you showing up and spending your time with me today. I know you have a lot of things to do, but thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
You bet.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.